one of my favorite sayings is if you stress about something before it happens, you essentially put yourself through it twice. Whereas a lot of people, when something goes wrong, they just panic and they get overwhelmed and they just get paralyzed by fear and they do nothing. And that's why, for me, the focus always has to be on how do you move forward? Because whenever you're focusing on the past, you're wasting time and energy on what can't be changed. And when you're focusing on the future, you're worrying about problems that may or may not even happen. So it's always just bringing it into the present to be like, okay, what do I need to do? We've had this big catastrophe. What other avenues do we take? What paths can we go down? Where can we pivot and adjust? It's always thinking in terms of solutions, not just focusing on problems.
Today, I have an incredible guest that I am so excited for you to meet. He hails to us from across the pond. So welcome, Byron Morrison.
Hey, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be on today.
Terrific. So Byron, my listeners know that I pretty much ask unconventional questions. So I want to ask you, rather than start about your career and your business, can you tell us something about yourself that we can't find out on Google or ChatGPT? Something that most people don't know about you. It can be about anything. When you stole somebody's underwear in fourth grade.
That's a great question. I actually was talking to someone about this at a party last weekend, and they asked me why I became a writer. And kind of growing up, one thing that not a lot of people know is I spent a lot of time as a musician and playing in bands. So I was really passionate about writing songs and creating music. And then for me, as obviously the rock star dream didn't quite work out, because otherwise we wouldn't be talking now. But I found another way to segue into that passion for writing books and speaking on stage and really having that same feeling, but in a different format. So yeah, it's something not a lot of people know about me, but that was very much what took me down that path as well, with beginning the writing journey.
So they didn't know you were a musician?
Yeah, no, or writing songs or any of that. It's not something I've really spoken about in my content or publicly. Like it's a part of my...
Why not? Why not? Why wouldn't you? That's so, I'm so interested that I'm amazed that you said that, because what's today? Friday. So this whole week, music has come up in my work with all my clients. And I have absolutely seen, and I know the neuroscience proves this, but I have seen such a correlation between musicianship and success, period.
Yeah.
So why would you not toot that horn, baby? Pun intended.
No, I don't have the data behind this, but my gut would tell me the reason why the two are correlated is because if you want to be a musician, it takes time, it takes practice, it takes dedication, it takes years of honing your craft, doing the same thing over and over again. And in business and your career, it's the same. You need that discipline and that consistency. So it doesn't surprise me at all that the two are linked. I've never seen the study, like I said, but yeah, that'll be my first thought as to why that actually is. It's the same as people who are really into fitness. They build those habits in the gym and they're doing the same thing over and over, and then they succeed in business as well.
Right. Well, what happens is you have that imprint in your brain, that neural pathways developed. I personally, for whatever it's worth, think that you should incorporate that into your talks and teachings and stuff, because I think it resonates with a lot of people. Like for me, someone that's tone deaf, can't play a note, can't sing a note, absolutely loves music. I am in awe of people that are musicians. And I have I've worked with musicians, and it's amazing the skill set they have. So having said that, tell us how the skills that you developed in music has influenced who you are today, and then how that translates to the work with your clients.
Yeah, so that really took me down the creative path, where a few years ago I was at a point where I wanted to become a writer. I wrote my first best-selling book. I've grown a business now that's worked with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders in 15 different countries, helping them really become who they need to be to get to the next level of success. And I'm at the point now where my fourth book's actually coming out, which is called Maybe You Should Give Up. And the reason I'm really excited about this book, going back to the music kind of topic, is when I was younger, my one dream was to be able to walk into a record store and buy a CD that I'd put together.
Oh, you were dating yourself. You were dating yourself. A CD as opposed to download.
So,
I thought you were going to say an album. I'm like, oh, now you're talking my age.
So I'm very much going to fulfill that dream, but in book form, because the book's hitting the stores in a couple of weeks.
I want to interrupt you for a second. Why? It's so interesting, the different dreams that we have. How do you think that dream came? Where'd that dream come from? Like dreams don't just
Yeah.
happen. There's a reason for them.
It was just for me growing up. Like music was my escape. It was something that I was just really into.
From
It was
what?
something that was
From what?
just life. Just when you're a teenager, and it's just like the challenges of growing up. And I was very much into like punk rock music and a lot of bands like Blink
Oh
182, and
no.
yeah,
Right,
it was
you're a
just like
Brit.
more Californian side, like all of that, like that music. And it was just something I really related to, and all the people I was around. It was just like a really great creative vibe, and it was just like a really positive energy. And I think that's very much resonated into the world I'm in now. Like the clients I want to work with still have the same mentality. Like they want to do something that matters, and they're creative and they're positive. And it's something that just inspires me and that I love being around.
Did you grow up around entrepreneurship? Like when I was a kid, I didn't even know what the word entrepreneur was. Like, if you showed it to me, I'd be like, I couldn't even pronounce it. Did you grow up around entrepreneurs? Were your parents
Uh,
entrepreneurs?
no, no, it was something. Well, my parents like at one point ran their own business, but it wasn't so much entrepreneurship. My dad was like an HR person, and they started an HR business. It wasn't so much like building it in another sense. It was just
Got it.
something I fell into after I wrote my first book. Basically the book did really well, and it was just from there I was like, okay, how do I build a business out of this? And then I just learned and found out along the way that actually like building businesses was something I was really good at. And it was just being an entrepreneur and putting it into it was actually something that really excited me. Whereas prior to being like early 20s, it's not something I really was exposed to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what is it, since you fell into it, as you said, which I'm always skeptical when people say that, but I'll take your word for it. What, and so you didn't have expectations. Having said that, what has surprised you about the entrepreneurial journey that the listeners can learn from?
About how much of a roller coaster it actually is. Because
For
when
sure.
I went into it, I was very young and naive. And when my first business was scaling and we were doing really well, like I was really good at the writing and helping people aspect, but I was completely in over my head when it came to running a company. I didn't know how to manage people. I didn't know how to have tough conversations. I didn't know how to deal with all these big decisions. And I just got pushed to a point where I was completely burnt out. I remember just looking at my calendar and I was just overwhelmed by the next fire I had to face. And for me, I actually reached a point where I was like, I don't know if this is worth it anymore. So I was like, I need to figure out how to get this under control. So I spent the
So
next
you
few
thought
years.
maybe you should give up.
Yeah, there was a lot of days where I was just like, should I just go and get a job? Like, is the pressure worth it? And I didn't want to go back to the corporate world. I'd worked so hard to get away from that. So I spent the next few years learning about managing people, high performance, dealing with conflicts and
And how
leadership
did
and
you do
everything
that?
else.
How did you do that learning? And the reason why I ask is I know for myself, early on in my entrepreneurial journey, there was so many rabbit holes. There was so much time, so much energy, and a lot of money wasted on a lot of bull crap out there. You know, people claiming to be the guru, we'll say, and they're full of crap. So and then it takes a while, and you find your road, you find the people that can add value. So how did you do that?
It was a combination. I was reading a lot of books, doing courses, some good, some just fluffy. I worked with a few really good mentors who really helped me. And then there was also a few people that I really looked up to. And I was like, just breaking down, okay, how are these really effective leaders? What are they doing that's got them to where they are? And really reverse engineering a lot of it. So it was just a lot of like just diving in and figuring it out, but then also taking the lessons and implementing it, because anyone can read books and do courses,
Right.
but it's in the application that people really struggle. So for me, the important thing was, okay, this is what I need to do. I need to now go implement it and figure it out and learn from it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really where it took me down the path of what I do with clients. Because the natural evolution of at the time, I was working with a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs and stuff on their health and their well-being. And naturally, the things that were impacting that started coming into the work we were doing. I was like, this is the journey I've just been on. I figured out how to fix it myself. And it's a natural progression to start helping people do the same. So that's really where, when you asked earlier, like the clients I work, it's just been basically people who are where I was a few years ago, who are like burnt out, overwhelmed. They want to get to that next level, but they're not showing up as the leader they need to be.
So I'm going to push back on you for a moment because I noticed you did not say you hired any coaches, unless you're using the word mentor and coach interchangeably.
I had a lot of coaches along the way, like whether it was
Okay.
marketing and business.
I want to
Yeah, I
make
just
sure
think
the listeners hear that. I want to make sure the
yeah.
listeners know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I included that. I meant that under the mentorship thing. Like I did a lot of coaches, a lot of kind of business mentors and everything of that. Like that was where I invested a ton of money because I'm a big advocate in Tony Robbins has got one of my favorite quotes of success leaves close. And it's like, you need people to bring out the best in you. It's like, you look at anyone from presidents to elite athletes, like they've all got coaches and people around them. So obviously as a coach myself, I'm a big advocate of it, but it's something that in my own life, I always make sure I have coaches around me. I've got coaches who are helping with my book launch. I've got a fitness coach. I work with different business coaches at different stages. It's just, I'm such a big advocate of you need that external help.
Oh, for sure. Because nobody knows everything, right? Nobody knows everything. So tell us about your favorite. Share a story about your favorite client where let's be honest, as coaches, sometimes you start and you're like, oh man, this is going to be an uphill battle. And I'm not so sure I'm signing up for this, right? Although honestly, I don't take those clients anymore, but we've had plenty of them. How did you win them over? How did you help them? Because some people are just so easy to help because they're sponges. Other people, not so much.
I've definitely been there in the past. I know exactly what you mean. Like I'm very fortunate for the stage I'm at business now that I can be very picky with the people I take on. So I go for people who are like, I really want to work with, who have great energy. But yeah, one of my favorite ones is actually one of the guys I worked with recently. Like when he came to me, he was just the bottleneck in the business. Like he was the founder, he'd grown it. He was just in the weeds. He was trying to do everything.
So common.
He was just getting in the way. And for him, we really need to figure out, okay, why wasn't he trusting people? How did he put processes to delegate? What did he need to do to actually start letting go so people would show up? And he found that by doing so, his team was incredible. They all stepped up to the plate. In the time that we were working together, in the kind of 3 months we were focusing on this recently, they've smashed their sales targets for the entire year. They've dominated all their numbers. They're now growing and expanding. And the thing that actually means the most for me is he's actually got his life back. Like it's always for me, it's like, it's great when you see someone having success in business, but when they can actually start leaving their phone behind and going out and seeing friends and taking up sports and just having fun, and you see that change in them. Like when someone says burnt out and stressed and overwhelmed at the beginning, and then by the end, they're just happy and joyful. Like that for me is always a fulfilling part of the work.
Great. What was the main shift that he implemented that helped him do that? I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. A big part of it was just coming to peace with the fact that you can't do everything. Like no great company was grown by one person. And a lot of founders have this fear that if they hand something off, it's not going to be done as well, or that they're going to drop the ball. And it's really overcoming that mental block of recognizing that actually the people around you want to do a good job, but you have to empower them. And it's for him, that was just a big thing because he was just holding up everything, like every key decision, every project, everything that needed to get done. He was just trying to micromanage it. And once he saw that actually he could trust people, it just opened up the whole business to a new level of possibilities.
That's great. How do you get someone, what you just said? So you have the control freak CEO, right? Which we all maybe we can relate to on a personal level or not. I don't know. It's possible. So how do you get somebody to trust that the people they surround themselves with? Because I would imagine this guy hired the people, right?
Yeah.
The way you describe him. How do you get them to realize they're surrounded by people that are trustworthy?
You've got to look
that can be a long
data.
story.
Yeah. Like I always say to clients that if they don't trust their team, one of two things is going on. Either they've hired the wrong people, which means at a foundational level, they've done a bad job and they need to go back in and get the right people, or they're not giving them an opportunity to step up. And then it comes in and figuring out, okay, where are you getting in the way? And what can you hand off and give people the opportunity to get done? Let them prove you wrong. Like if you're worried that they're going to drop the ball, like give them the chance. Because a lot of the time you hold on to it and you're worried that if they make mistakes, it's going to be the end of the world. But you have to take that pressure off them. Be like, you are going to mess up and that's okay. But people learn by doing. So it's figuring out, okay, where can you set the right expectations, communicate what needs to get done, and then have accountability to make sure they follow through. And a perfect example was I had one guy I was working with where there was one task that he hated doing, but for their biggest client, they had to do a lot of database reporting and send it in. So he was really in the weeds with it. So we had to put in a process where he would get someone else to do it. He would then get someone else to double check it from an accountability standpoint, and then it would be fed back to him, and he would check it a final time. And we made an agreement up front that once he's done that 3 times, if there's no mistakes, that is enough of a proving point they can let it go. Because his big fear was like, if they make mistakes, they're going to lose this client. So it's like, you have to trust them, but it doesn't mean do it blindly. Still put checks and balances in place, and then get to a point where you're like, do you know what? I'm confident and comfortable that they can take ownership. So it doesn't have to just be like, okay, it's your problem now, just hand it off. There'll be some things you want to do that, but if it's massively important, it's just like, okay, what is going to help you feel at ease and then gradually build into it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I tell my clients, unless you're doing neurosurgery or rocket science, it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be good enough. It has to be done well. People will be forgiving of, if the spelling of the word is wrong or if it's the wrong verb tense. Nobody's going to die. But if the content is good, if you're adding value consistently, it's okay. And many times I find that it's that level of minutia that's just such a waste of energy. And when you bring that back to your people, they are literally going, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah. Like one other piece of advice I'd give to anyone listening to this who's just thinking out, okay, well, I know I need to delegate, but where do I start? Is in my book, The Effective CEO, I talk about figuring out what your zone of genius is. So essentially, anyone listening to this, you need to uncover, where does your time have the greatest impact in the business? Like what leads to growth?
My listeners know that as your unique ability from Dan. Dan Sullivan.
Yeah, so figure out, okay, what can only be done by you? Where does your time have the greatest impact? And then when you're going into your to-do list or tasks you've taken on, ask yourself honestly, does this fall within my realm of unique ability or zone of genius, whatever you want to call it? And if the answer is no, should it be done by you or could it be done by someone else? And if it could be done by someone else, who could you hand it off to? Like I regularly have people who come in and we go through this activity and they'll remove 50% plus of their to-do list, which then frees them up. Yeah, I've had it so many times with clients because they just stuck on stuff that's busy work that doesn't matter. But the thing they don't recognize is by being involved in that, it takes them away from the things that actually lead to growth. Because at that level, you're either going to be able to do a few things really well or many things mediocre or badly. So you have to get really defensive with what you choose to take on.
Right. So tell me, you talk about how today's pressures are different. There's more complications and CEOs get lost in that. So how do you help people? You in a way, what you're describing is prioritizing, triaging, right? But today you wake up and the world might be, it's normal craziness, right? Tomorrow you might wake up and somebody might have flown planes into the World Trade Center. Right? Things that we never imagined before, right? I say this as a native New Yorker, right? How do you help CEOs navigate the trying times that you really can't be prepared for?
So a big part of my work and my message, it's always focusing on what you can control. Because anyone can sit there and worry about problems. If this could go wrong, what if this happens, and all of these things. And one of my favorite sayings is, if you stress about something before it happens, you essentially put yourself through it twice. And that's why for me, it's all about shifting your focus from the past and the future into the present.
And only maybe twice, because the research shows most of the things we worry about never happen. Yeah. Certainly with raising children. Yeah.
So it's just all about focusing on, okay, what do you need to do about it? And then if, say you've got a plan and you've got a structure and you're progressing and then something derails it, then you need to stop and take a step back and be like, okay, where do we go from here? How can we control this? And what do we need to do move forward? Whereas a lot of people, when something goes wrong, they just panic and they get overwhelmed and they just get paralyzed by fear and they do nothing. And that's why for me, the focus always has to be on, how do you move forward? Because whenever you're focusing on the past, you're wasting time and energy on what can't be changed. And when you're focusing on the future, you're worrying about problems that may or may not even happen. So it's always just bringing it into the present to be like, okay, what do I need to do? We've had this big catastrophe. What other avenues do we take? What paths can we go down? Where can we pivot and adjust? It's always thinking in terms of solutions, not just focusing on problems.
Okay. So how did you help a company do that during COVID?
So COVID was an interesting one because a lot
right?
of the clients I was working with actually led to real growth. And a big part of that, even though I don't work in strategy, I did have a lot of conversations with business owners who were looking at ways of how do we capitalize on this? And it was breaking down a
Mm,
lot of businesses, like opportunities, and look at, okay, where could we pivot? Are there new markets we could go down? Where are things not working? And really looking for new decisions. Because perfect example, I had one guy that I was working with who he had a completely in-person business. He was doing a lot of events. Everything overnight got disrupted. So with
right,
him, it
right.
was really talking about, okay, instead of stressing about that, what can you do to slow down and figure out, okay, what other opportunities are there here? Breaking it down, looking at avenues he could go online. He launched a new offer and product, and they scaled revenue-wise far beyond what they were doing before. So a
Mhm,
big part of it is just slowing down, because a lot of people become their own worst enemy because they're just
mhm.
constantly rushing around. They're like, we need to get things done. We need to make it happen. And it's like, no, you need to take a step back, figure out what's actually going to be the best use of your energy, and then move forward. So for COVID, it was a really interesting one of just getting people just to recalibrate and look at all the cards on the table and be like, okay, in this uncertainty, where do we go from here?
Right. And event planners, that is definitely one crowd that was completely blown up overnight. And the ones that pivoted to online became uber successful. And the quicker they did it, the more successful they were. What's your take on where we're headed insofar as hybrid and working from home and remote work? I will say, you know, someone that's been a working mother, women, and of course it depends upon your job, right? But women have been begging to be able to work from home since we've gone into the paid workforce, because we've always been working. Like the concept that the my kids are grown, but I can think of the freedom of, you wake up and there's no hot water, right? So you have to have
Yeah.
the hot water guy come, and you really have to have him come today. So what do? Like, I know my husband wasn't home or if you're a single mom, right? So to be able to not, and by the way, back in the day, I would always tell my clients, you tell work that you're sick or that you had a flat tire. This was before the phone, because you couldn't say anything that was, that would suggest that you weren't 1,000% committed to your work,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're working for somebody else. But now you can work from home. Kids get on the school bus, or you take them to school. And, inevitably the guy says he's coming at 10. He's not coming at 10. He comes whenever he wants to come, right? So he shows up at 3 and you're still so productive. So that's my take for the most part. I feel like there's such a pushback, quite frankly, from, every time you hear them say culture, just think control. But where do you feel we're going?
Yeah. So I spoke about this quite a lot in my content post-pandemic. And one thing I still stand by this belief, I think that the one really good thing that's going to come out of COVID is companies who told everyone that they couldn't work from home suddenly had to find a way that they actually could allow people to do it. And I think
Right.
from a mental health, from a work-life balance, from a burnout standpoint, having that in place is amazing. Like I'm a huge
Environment.
advocate. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a huge advocate of hybrid working. I kind of, I, as somebody who works from home, because that's how I've built my business, just from seeing it in
Me too.
clients, however,
Yeah.
I'm a much bigger advocate in a lot of business. It's going to be different depending on different companies. But for me
Of course.
personally, from what I've seen, hybrid tends to be the best setup, because
Hmm.
there are situations where you need people in a room, like you need
Hmm.
people to get together to be creative. But the way I've seen it, that can be the exception, not the norm. Even if
Hmm.
you get people to come in 1 or 2 days a week and then give them that freedom and flexibility, because a workforce that is energized is more productive. But then
Hmm.
you also need to look at how do you put the right boundaries in place? Because the problem with remote working is people don't switch off properly. They're always connected. They're on their phone. They're checking emails. So their workday then just becomes extended. So I
Hmm.
think there is a balance that we haven't quite got right yet. And this is why burnout is becoming such a big problem, because people just aren't disconnecting. So I think we are
And
going
by
to
the
go
way,
more
I
into this.
think what's interesting about what you're saying is, when you hear people talk about, have boundaries, have parameters, the implication is not they're always on. The implication is they're not really working, which I disagree with.
Yeah. And people want to do a good job. Like they want to advance in their career. They want to be given the opportunity. And that's why I believe as employees, you need to find out how do you do that in a way that serves you and the employee. But it's going to be very company specific. Some companies want to need people in the office. But then that goes back to the argument of as a job seeker, you need to be like looking for jobs that cater to your needs. Because a lot of people, a lot of people want the company to change things for them. And life doesn't work that way. Like if you get a job and it's set up that they want you in the office.
I think that's generational. So what have you seen the CEOs come to you with in that regard, with that challenge?
So it's a lot of just communicating and setting expectations because you can't make everyone happy. And that's why you've really got, at the end of the day, as the CEO, your responsibility is to the business. So you need to figure out, okay, the setup that's going to drive growth, is it allowing people to have freedom at home? Is it, you do need people regularly in the office, and then you have to enforce it. And then it just needs to be communicated from a hiring stage. This is the way we're set up. Because and if people aren't happy with it, and you asked at the beginning, then you don't hire them. Because we've seen so much pushback of people getting jobs and then complaining about the fact that they can't work from home. And it's just like, that's why it needs to be set at the beginning, what the expectation is. Because
I think what's happening now is that they were told they could work remote and now they can't. And I think Google and maybe Facebook, and there's plenty of others. And now you're shifting and people made some significant lifestyle shifts.
Yeah. It's a really tough one because it's never going to, and that's why I'm a big fan of the hybrid setup, because I feel like it's a bit of a compromise and a middle ground. But it's, at the end of the day, though, as a CEO, you do have a responsibility to the company, but you also need to question what are your reasons behind doing it? Because some people, I've spoken to CEOs who want everyone in the office because they like seeing a busy office. Like it's the reasonings behind it aren't based on productivity or effectiveness or anything else. They just feel like they're paying for the office space. They want people in there using it.
That's the issue. The commercial real estate. Yeah.
So you've got to go.
How do you influence that? How do you influence that? And I like to see people busy in the office, assuming that they're busy working on what they're supposed to be working on. Yeah. Some people have perfected the art of looking busy as they're surfing Amazon.
You've just got to then look at the data. Like you've got to have key metrics that you're aiming towards where you can track, is someone performing and delivering? And if you can have a look based on someone's performance of where they do better at home in the office, then you can make a judgment call. Because you can get people in the office, but if they're just sat around talking for multiple hours a day, they'd be better off sat at home when it's quiet and focus time and get stuff done. Like for me, if I use my home life as an example, like I work from home, and if I'm back in the corporate world, I was terrible. Like I need silence to focus and get work done. Like if there's talking and music, I cannot concentrate. My girlfriend, on the other hand, hates working from home. She finds she gets distracted. She likes being around people. She likes music, like to be able to bounce ideas off people. She wants to go into the office every day. So you've got to then have those conversations to understand how different people operate, because no one's the same. And that's why from a leadership standpoint, you've got to make sure you don't just put people in the same buckets. You've really got to figure out, okay, what is optimal, but also then feeding into the business's needs and really challenging. Is it just some stereotype if you're thinking, I want the office to make it look busy, or is that actually leading to the results that you want?
Right. So you brought up leadership. What do you feel, how would you define a leader? And then how do you believe you can develop somebody? And then what are the skill sets that you help them with?
So I believe that leadership is all about bringing out the best in those around you. It's like setting a clear vision of what you want to achieve and then empowering people to achieve it, which is definitely a skill set that you can develop. But a lot of people, especially first-time leaders, because I work with a lot of first-time CEOs and people who've been pushed into that leadership spot, they've got the mentality that being a leader means you have to instruct people. You need to tell them exactly what to do. You need to micromanage them. You always have to give clear guidance. And no, like leadership is all about surrounding yourself with the right people, bringing together the best ideas, then using that to guide decisions. So it's really about, for me, like developing those skills is knowing when to take a back seat. It's knowing when you need to let other people talk, when you need to start engaging, what you need, ask probing questions, and then coach people and guide them to get them to do better things. And a lot of that comes in just communication. Like you need to spend time with your people. You need to understand how they operate, their desires, what gets them inspired, and then put in the right processes to really bring that out, which a lot of that is going to come down to spending time in the trenches, getting to know the people around you.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can do that online, no?
You can 100% do that online, but you've got to be intentional about it. Like, you've got to set, like, I deal with a lot of kind of CEOs who are so busy, they never have time to have catch up with their team. And then they complain that their people aren't being managed properly. And it's just like, well, you've got to find time to like have those sessions to connect, to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just finding that balance. And that goes back to the delegation aspect, because a lot of the time, the reason why they don't have time to spend with their team is because they're involved in stuff they shouldn't be.
Right. I find it interesting when you said, CEOs say, I don't have time for that. I'm like, well, then you don't know what leadership is, because it's about developing relationships with your people. That's my take on that.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was doing a leadership training, and I said to them, when's the last time, let's say you have a team of 10, something manageable, right? So when's the last time you picked up the phone, literally picked up the phone, not texted, and just called them and said, hey, how you doing? And they looked at me and I said, try it. This is what's going to happen if you haven't done it. Hey, how you doing? This is your boss, Byron. Hello, how are you? Good. How's everything going? Good. And then they're on the other line waiting to hear what they did wrong or what you want them to do. And if you just have it doesn't take a lot of time. If you say, listen, I was just calling, see how things are going. Do you need anything? Appropriate questions about them as a person, not just as a worker and the key metrics, right? Listen, feel free, reach out. If I can help you with anything, let me know. I just wanted to let you know we appreciate all the work. They will get off that phone with you and they will start texting their colleagues. You're not going to believe this, but Byron just texted me just to see how I was doing. But then you have to do it again because they're still going to be waiting. It is so amazing how that increases somebody's ability to, what I consider leadership is influence, because now you care about them as a person. I feel like that's lacking today.
I think it's going to get worse. Because a lot of companies, like, while the digital boom is amazing.
It will get worse, you said? It will get worse, you think?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, the reason I say that is because I see it with a lot of clients where everything's so online. Most of their communication's done over Slack. And it's just like, It's all text. Like, they don't pick up the phone.
Sure.
And then people are so fed up of having virtual calls. Like, I speak about with clients all the time where they're like, if I have to go on one more Zoom call today, I'm going to pull my hair out. Because that goes back to how the work setup, because a lot of those leaders want people in the room, and that's why they're trying to get them back. So it's a really difficult balance to strike. But I love what you said, because I think it's so important. It's just taking those few minutes to see how someone's actually doing. But this is one thing I always advise the clients: you have to schedule it.
And by the way, and you can schedule it. And by the way, although they'll be like, by the way,
I meant put into your calendar.
Yeah.
Because so you could set aside every week, okay, at this sort of time, I'm going to call people and block it in. Because if you don't have it scheduled in, it's going to be one of those things that you never get around to, that you've got the right intentions, but it just doesn't happen.
Right. Well, I tell them to be strategic and follow up like every 6 weeks, which comes fast. But to your point, since nobody calls anymore, if you call, you will get their attention, right? That's the point. And it really is quite impactful, as opposed to just sending a text.
Yeah. The point I'd love to add into this is just across the board, the thing I see most of the people I work with struggling with is the people aspect. Because I work with a lot of founders who'll develop a product, they'll grow the startup, like things will be going great in that aspect, but they've never led the team. They don't know how to communicate, have tough conversations, deal with people. So they almost stick their head in the sand and just avoid it, because they don't know what's going on and they don't like the pushback. They don't like the tough conversations. It's just like, that's unfortunately part of the role. And that's why the sooner you can accept that's a skill set you need to develop, the sooner you're going to actually become effective as a leader and CEO. Whereas I've had guys before running billion-dollar businesses, and when I've started working with them, they would put off tough conversations for months at a time. they just wouldn't respond to the emails or the calls, or they would just leave someone to carry on being toxic because they don't want to face it because it's uncomfortable. And that's why it's all about overcoming that fear, just being like, if you want to be an effective leader, you have to step up and do it. No one wants to do it. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. If you could start reframing it, that it's not a tough conversation. It's about clarity. It's about figuring out what's going on. How do you move forward? What needs to change? And it's just really looking at ways to just actually face it head on. And that's why a lot of people don't recognize about being an effective leader actually is. It's not just about strategy and direction. It's about how do you develop your people and actually face the tough things that come with it.
Well, one of my taglines is relationship skills that drive the bottom line, right? And what happens is when you either leaders aren't aware, or they're aware and they avoid it, ignore it, deny it, repress it. And then there's a concept, emotions that are repressed get amplified. It eventually comes back to haunt you, but it creates a wake of dead bodies in its trail of dead bodies in its wake. And what I have seen leaders have a really hard time doing is letting go of people. And because they don't, in spite of what some people might think, they care about their people and they don't want to hurt their feelings. People don't let go of people easily. Not anyone that's not a sociopath, unless you're a sociopath, right? Which they exist. But so what I've told leaders to get around that is to say to someone, you're doing them a disservice by allowing them to stay in a role that they're not going to thrive at. And when I say that, it seems to shift the mindset. And I'll say, something, and not obnoxiously, but I need to give you the grace to be able to leave here so that you can fulfill your potential, because this isn't a good fit. Right. And it's it's honest, it's authentic, and it's kind. And down the road, the people, maybe not initially, but the people that will let go, they knew it wasn't a good fit, or they knew, again, 80-20 rule, right? They knew they were failing. And you're doing a disservice to not only the person that you need to let go, but to the team, because the team knows as well, right? So then the conversation becomes, how do you help leaders stop tolerating what they shouldn't be tolerating?
Yeah. It's part of that, I would also interject as well, is just accepting and being at peace with the fact that as the company grows, people outgrow it as well. Like I see it quite often, especially with founders at the beginning. They have the co-founders and people around them. And as they scale, people who are a great fit at the beginning are no longer a fit, but then they hold on to it because they're worried about the tough conversation. They don't want to let people down. And it's so often the intention's in the right place because you want to be a good person. You don't want to do that. But ultimately, you have a duty to the business. And if you allow this to carry on, you're not just letting that person down, you're letting the company down, the team that are being held down, the customers, the growth, the impact, the more people you could help. So it's something that you have to come to terms with. It's not easy. It's not something that you want to do, but it's just looking at people growing and they change, and that's okay.
Well, leadership is hard. That's why we have so few good ones. Just look at the state of the world. And, it's interesting because many people that come to me will be like, I have this one guy now that runs gazillion-dollar hedge funds. He's like, I am so good with the business. I am so good with the numbers. Like I can see things. He goes, you know what I suck at? I need your help with the people. And I'm like, dude, that's 80% of the business. He goes, I know.
It's exactly the same for my work. And that's why it's such a common thing. It's just like these amazing people, what they do, but they just don't grasp the people aspect.
Well, we're not taught it. Yeah. We're really not taught. What do you think about this is, I'm going to throw a grenade here. What about the conversations today around politics and the workplace and taking a stance? How does that show up in your work, and how do you manage that?
Honestly, it's not something that's come up that much. It's not really an issue that I've dealt with. So my personal stance on it, though, is that politics should be kept out of the workplace. Like you're there for a company to do a job. Your political thoughts and feelings are kind of irrelevant. do what you want in your own time,
Mhm.
have your beliefs and all of that. But I think from a company standpoint, I'm a big advocate of we're there to do a job. And I think
Well,
that's
that's how
where
it
people
used to
start
be.
getting all together. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then because all it does is divide people, and then it makes differences
clearly.
and arguments that waste time over things that don't matter. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's not actually something that's come up, but if it did, that's the advice I would give. It's like it's making it a rule of what you believe, go for it, but do not bring it into the office. And when
The
people
workplace.
do set the expectations and say like, this is not a topic of discussion in office hours on company grounds. Like
Right,
that's the
right.
advice I would give in this case.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's different for entrepreneurs than companies that are, publicly traded. I don't know when that shift happened. I'm sure there was some kind of turning point, but I think it's a little kooky that I don't know. Like somebody said once, you can't legislate values. I think they're right. Either have good values, but you can't enforce somebody to. Well, I don't know.
I would argue on that though, like you can have good values regardless of your political beliefs, because there's going to be a lot of values whether you like regardless of which side of the political spectrum you're on, like your values of who you are as a person can be the same. So you can still set values for the company, like this is what we believe, this is how we show
values.
Up. Yes. But also just what you expect with your team. But yeah, the political side of it. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's not one that I've dived too much into that, but it's definitely like a really interesting topic.
Yeah, and I don't know if I said to you, but before I start all these conversations, I usually say to people, is there anything off limits? And I'll talk about everything and anything, but not politics, because it's just so divisive, right? And it doesn't have to be. And nobody, like when you're having a difficult conversation with politics is today, I teach people how when you start it, before you say a word, think about how you want the person to feel when the conversation's over, right? And if we did that, well, we want to feel heard, understood, maybe not agreed with, but nobody's doing that, right? So we're all failing at the difficult conversations.
Yeah. I just think it's because we become so close-minded. If you look at political conversations, this is true to a lot of stuff in business as well, not just politics. A lot of people just have the mentality of, I'm right, and I'm going to try and convince you. No one goes in with the mentality of being no one's willing to go in and listen to the other side and find a middle ground or change their mind or be open to new ideas. I think that's part of the issue. And this isn't just, like I said, political, it's also in business. People are so set in their way of thinking that they don't want to see different ideas. And that's why I think one thing that really great leaders do is they challenge like the norm. They get people to think bigger, to change things that are going on and see problems in a different light. Because when you can really start doing that, that's where you can bring out the best in people. Because all of us have got beliefs, we've got a way of looking at things, and it can get very tunnel visioned at times. And that's why as a leader, you need to find ways to navigate it without it being a conflict or an argument or just people pushing back. So it's all about looking at, okay, how can you nurture them and create an environment where these ideas can be brought to the table in a discussion way, whether you're looking at ways to launch a new product or go after a new market or whatever it is, you have to find ways to do that. Otherwise, you're going to be very limited, not just in the thinking, but the results that you can create.
Yeah. I mean, I work with so many co-founders, and what happens is by the time they get to me, they are so entrenched in their right and the other person's wrong, right? And it's not a zero-sum game. But depending upon your perspective and your life experience, there's very few real facts. There's very few truths, religion aside, all that kind of stuff, right? Most things are subjective, but we get to your point, we get so entrenched in it, our way or the highway, and it impacts the ability to grow and to be innovative, which leads me to another topic, failure. Companies, in order to grow, and they might say, we give you permission to fail, but show me the company that the last time allowed somebody to fail and then promoted them. And I'm talking about fail within reason, right? So how do you manage that with CEOs? Because CEOs will set that tone, right? Because we learn more from failure than anything else.
Again, it goes back to a mindset and looking at the opportunities that are created. Because if you really break it down, like you said, failures, you need to fail to grow. And it's going in with that mentality of there's going to be some failures that are catastrophic. And it's just like those, but it's for the most part, failures and setbacks. Yeah, within reason. But there are going to be other ones that actually lead you down to new ideas and paths.
Calculated failures.
And that's why it's all about looking at it from the standpoint of, okay, what opportunities does this failure open up? And how does it, over a course of time, does it lead to growth? Because if someone's just making terrible decisions over and over again, not learning from them and making things worse, and clearly you don't want to promote them. Whereas if someone made a mistake and then you look at their performance review, they've bounced back, they've led to new ideas and they've learned from it, that's where you can really audit it. So it's not judging someone just on a setback. It's being like over a period of time. And that goes back to knowing your people. Because if you know that someone's competent and that this failure was them trying something and didn't quite work out, that's very different to you just being blind and just viewing, oh, someone's just made this huge mistake. So it's just always recognizing and looking at from a long period of time and how do they bounce back and pivot? Because if they just keep doing the same thing over and over, it means they're clearly not learning from it.
Anything.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes you fail, sometimes you learn. Okay, so I want to respect your time, but I have another question. And what's the last book you reread? And it can't be yours. And why?
So the last book I reread was The Hard Thing About Hard Things, just because
I love hard things.
Yeah, I just love the mentality. Yeah, I just love the mentality of like facing the tough things in life. Because I think whether it's in business, being a CEO, like if you want to get to that next level, you have to be able to face the tough things in the way. Like I'm such a big believer that if you want a life that other people never live, you have to be able to do and willing to do the things that other people won't. And I just love that book about talking about leadership and facing the tough barriers in the way and not just procrastinating and avoiding it. Because going back to like the work I do with clients, like there's guys running billion-dollar businesses who just avoid the challenging things. It's the things that are uncomfortable, tough conversations, issues with people, and put it off. And those problems manifest and cause so many other issues. And that's why I'm such a big believer in pushing people to do the hard things. So
what's a hard thing that you've had? What's a hard thing that you've had to do?
Recently, I had to fire a member of my team because we had a huge catastrophe. I hired someone for a project and they talked a really big game, and then, or even I put the right. I going back to it, I would have still made the hiring decision, but in the end, the person just didn't follow through, and they kept saying they were doing stuff they weren't, and it just came out to be an absolute disaster. So I had to let that person go, but luckily I've got another member of my team who's an absolute rock star, and she stepped up and got everything handled because it's building directly to our book launch. So we were on very much a time schedule of this is a time-sensitive problem. So because I was keeping my eyes on it, it was a big headache. But it was just like, okay, focus on what we can control. There's no point dwelling on it or just like wasting energy on the past. It's like, what can we do about this and how do we bounce back? So that was one of the,
So you gave her a gracious exit so he or she could fulfill her potential.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel that way, huh?
No, we won't frame it that way. That was just a hard thing because we found out that
don't let it hit you on the ass on the way.
Yeah, the person kept saying they had done all of this work, and then it turned out they had done none of it. So
they weren't trustworthy.
Yeah. So it was a hard situation, but it was a learning experience.
Right before I launched my first book, I had a very integral member of my team just ghost me. AWOL.
That's what this one did.
That says everything. Okay. Lesson learned. Anyway, all right. Unabashedly tell people about your book, where they can get it, how they can learn more about you. Full on commercial.
So my new book coming out is called Maybe You Should Give Up, 7 Ways to Get Out of Your Own Way and Take Control of Your Life. And this is not about giving up on your goals and dreams, but what I've discovered from working with people in 15 countries is there are 7 mental blocks that every one of us hold on to that holds us back and stops us from living the life that we want, whether it's fear, comparing ourselves to others, worrying about problems that haven't happened yet, or being too hard on ourselves. these cause us to get in our own way. And that's why maybe you should give up is all about giving up on the mental barriers that are stopping you from taking control of the life that you want. It's everything that I've learned over the last decade, broken down in a book, showing you step by step what you need to do to stop being the stumbling block in the way of your own success. So you can get it now anywhere that you can order books. You can also find out more about me at byronmorrison.com. And also the best place to follow me is on LinkedIn. I've got a couple of other books called The Effective CEO and CEO in Control, and I put out daily videos and leadership pieces on how to be an effective CEO and leader. So yeah, byronmorrison.com, or search for Byron Morrison on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Great. And then are you coming, because you're over in England, are you coming over to the States anytime soon if people wanted to come listen to you, hear you, see you?
The next step in my business is we're going to launch the speaking side. So this book is, I'm using it as the catalyst to launch where I want to start speaking around the US and doing more events. Like my CEO coaching is still going to be my main focus because I love the work that I do with that. But yeah, the speaking side is like the next thing that we want to dive into, just because I love being on stage and talking and inspiring people. So that's the next evolution of where I'm going.
All right. So Byron Morrison, thank you so much for being a guest today. I want everybody to make sure you go get Maybe You Should Give Up and learn the 7 lessons that Byron has spent his career helping CEOs face and overcome.